Imagine navigating the frozen Arctic, not with satellites or modern tech, but with the wisdom of the wind, waves, and even specific bird calls. How did ancient Vikings predict deadly ice movements, ensuring their survival in the most unforgiving waters on Earth? We're about to crack their astonishing ice code, a sophisticated system of environmental observation that ensured they lived to tell their tales. Before we dive into these amazing survival techniques, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below telling me which Viking skill surprised you the most. Now, let's explore how these Norse seafarers became masters of the frozen seas. The Vikings knew that birds were their best scouts in Arctic waters. When sailors spotted certain species flying in particular patterns, they could predict what lay ahead with remarkable accuracy. Auks and puffins, for example, always flew toward open water where they could dive for fish. If these birds were heading in a specific direction, the Vikings knew that path would lead them away from dangerous ice fields. Gulls behaved differently. Large flocks of gulls hovering and calling meant they'd found a rich feeding area, which indicated open water with plenty of fish. Even the height at which birds flew mattered. Low-flying seabirds often meant a storm was approaching, while birds flying high suggested stable weather ahead. The Vikings paid close attention to migration patterns, too, understanding that when certain species began their seasonal journeys, ice conditions were about to change dramatically. Water doesn't just sit still in the ocean, it moves in powerful rivers beneath the surface, and the Vikings learned to read these invisible highways. By trailing their hands in the water, experienced sailors could detect temperature changes that told them about nearby ice. Colder water flowing from a certain direction meant glaciers or ice sheets were close. Warmer currents suggested they were moving away from the ice and toward more open seas. The Vikings also watched how their ships drifted when the sails were down. A strong sideways pull indicated a powerful current that could either help them escape ice-choked waters or warn them they were being pushed toward danger. They noticed that currents often flowed along the edges of ice fields, creating natural pathways. By following these currents, Viking navigators could travel through Arctic waters more safely, using the ocean's own movement as a guide through treacherous territory. Clouds weren't just white puffs in the sky to the Vikings. They were detailed messages about what weather was coming. Thin, wispy clouds high in the sky meant fair weather would continue for at least another day. But when clouds began to thicken and lower, the Vikings knew a storm was brewing, and they needed to find shelter quickly. They paid special attention to cloud colors, too. Dark gray clouds obviously meant rain or snow, but reddish clouds at sunrise warned of storms later in the day. The famous saying, "Red sky at night, sailor's delight, red sky in morning, sailor take warning," comes from this ancient knowledge. Wind patterns were equally important. Vikings noticed that winds from certain directions brought specific weather. A north wind in Arctic regions usually brought clear but extremely cold conditions, while winds from the south or west often carried storms and warmer, wet weather that could cause ice to shift dangerously. Seals and whales were more than just sources of food and materials for the Vikings. These animals were living navigational tools that revealed critical information about ice conditions. Seals hauling out onto ice floes in large numbers indicated that the ice was stable and thick enough to support weight. This told Viking sailors that heavy pack ice was nearby and they should adjust their course. On the other hand, when seals stayed in the water and seemed nervous or agitated, this could mean the ice was unstable or breaking up. Whales provided even more valuable information. When whales were spotted surfacing frequently in a particular area, it meant there was open water deep enough for these massive creatures to swim comfortably. Whale migrations were also reliable calendars.
The Vikings knew that when certain whale species began moving south, winter ice would soon make northern waters impassable. Following whale routes sometimes led Vikings to channels of open water cutting through otherwise frozen seas. Floating objects told stories about what was happening with currents and ice conditions. When Vikings spotted driftwood floating in Arctic waters, they examined it carefully. Fresh-looking wood with bark still attached meant it had recently broken free from ice or shore, suggesting ice was breaking up somewhere nearby. Old weathered driftwood indicated the current had carried it a long distance, and the direction it was traveling showed which way the current was flowing. This helped Vikings navigate and avoid being pushed into danger. Large amounts of debris or plant material floating together suggested a major ice breakup had occurred, and conditions might be unstable. Ice itself could be debris too. Small chunks of ice floating in the water, called brash ice, warned Vikings that larger ice formations were close by. If the Vikings saw the amount of floating ice increasing, they knew they were heading towards solid pack ice and needed to change course before becoming trapped. These observations, combined with other navigation techniques, would have helped them stay safe. Ice isn't silent. It groans, cracks, pops, and rumbles, and Vikings learned to interpret these sounds like a language. A deep rumbling groan meant massive ice sheets were moving and pressing against each other, creating dangerous pressure ridges that could crush a ship. Sharp cracking sounds indicated ice was breaking apart, which either meant a path was opening up or that ice around them was becoming unstable. Popping and tinkling sounds came from smaller ice crystals forming in the water, telling Vikings that temperatures were dropping and ice was actively growing. This meant they needed to move quickly before new ice trapped their vessel. Vikings also listened for silence. When the usual ice sounds suddenly stopped, experienced sailors knew that meant the ice had frozen solid and become stable, or that they'd moved into open water. At night, when visibility was poor, these sound cues became even more important for avoiding danger. The color of the ocean likely gave Vikings important clues about what was mixed into the water and what that meant for navigation. Bright blue or green water indicated deep, open ocean that was relatively free of ice and sediment. This was generally safe water for sailing. Milky or cloudy white water meant glacial melt was mixing in, suggesting Vikings were near glaciers or large ice formations. This water often carried small ice particles that could damage ship hulls over time. Brown or muddy water indicated sediment from rivers or coastal erosion, suggesting land was nearby. Vikings also watched for ice blink, a white or yellowish glow on the underside of clouds that reflected light from ice fields below. Even when ice wasn't visible yet, this reflection warned them it was ahead. Based on what Arctic sailors have learned over centuries, experienced Vikings could have read these color changes to navigate more safely through dangerous waters. Vikings lived close to nature and understood that animals moved according to reliable seasonal patterns linked to ice formation and melting. When they saw caribou beginning their migration toward coastal areas in autumn, they knew winter ice would soon form along the shores. Birds migrating south in large flocks signaled that Arctic waters would become impassable within weeks. The Vikings timed their own voyages around these natural calendars. They knew that certain fish species moved to deeper waters when ice began forming in shallow areas. When fishermen noticed these fish disappearing from their usual spots, it was time to head south or find winter harbor. In spring, the return of migratory birds and the movement of whales northward told Vikings that ice was breaking up and northern routes were becoming navigable again. This natural timing system was more reliable than any calendar because it responded to actual environmental conditions rather than arbitrary dates.
Beyond basic cloud observation, Vikings developed sophisticated techniques for predicting weather changes. Lenticular clouds, Smooth, lens-shaped formations indicated strong winds at high altitude, which usually meant weather changes were coming within 12 to 24 hours. A ring or halo around the sun or moon, caused by ice crystals in high clouds, warned of approaching storms within a day or two. Mammatus clouds, with their distinctive pouch-like appearance, signaled severe weather and potentially dangerous conditions. Vikings also noticed that when clouds appeared to be stacked in layers, with different layers moving in different directions, it meant the atmosphere was unstable and storms were likely. They watched how quickly clouds moved across the sky, too. Fast-moving clouds indicated strong winds aloft, suggesting a weather system was approaching rapidly. The Vikings didn't have GPS, weather satellites, or modern navigation tools, but they survived and thrived in some of the world's most dangerous waters. They did this by becoming expert observers of nature, reading dozens of signs that told them about ice conditions, weather patterns, and safe routes. Every bird, every current, every sound and color in the water provided crucial information. This knowledge was passed down through generations, with young sailors learning from experienced captains until they could read the Arctic seas themselves. Their survival depended on understanding that nature was always communicating. You just had to know how to listen. If you found these Viking survival techniques fascinating, smash that like button and subscribe for more historical content. Drop a comment telling me which technique you think was most clever. Would you have survived as a Viking sailor in the Arctic? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.